I'm Carla Hayden, the Librarian of Congress, and I hope you all have been enjoying the book festival. I know I've been having a wonderful, wonderful time. Someone said, well, you know, Miss Hayden, weren't you a children's librarian? I said, yep. He said, and then you became a young adult librarian? I said, yep. He said, well, you're having fun. I said, oh, yep. I am having so much fun, and that's what we want you to know that the book festival is all about. It's about the joy of reading, the joy of relating to people who are writing about you and writing about others. And that's what we hope that our next guest, who flew here from Australia, and with a special thank you to the Embassy of Australia for sponsoring and presenting this. So thank you, the Embassy. And as you know, our next author, Markus Zusak, where's the applause? Was recently just one of PBS's Great American Reads, The Book Thief. He's also the author of the extraordinary international bestseller, I Am the Messenger. And you should know, and you probably do, his new book, Bridge of Clay, is already receiving very positive reviews and a lot of book buzz. So please welcome, straight from Australia, to the 2019 Library of Congress Book Festival, Markus Zusak.
Thank you for your hug. Thank you.
And I opened the water for you.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Oh, geez, I just had to get that hug in. How often do you get that opportunity? Thank you so much. I'm honored and thrilled, and I'm so thrilled that you're all here. It does take me back. I always start, this is like my security blanket beginning story, where the very first time I ever did something like this, it was a reading in Australia, I'm not going to say where, and I did something like this for my first ever book, The Underdog, and of course, I got to the town and everyone said, oh, it's a great arts town, and they love books and they love reading, and of course, 6:30 in the evening, I got there to do the event, and of course, no one turned up. And it's not even the best part. The best part is that the librarian still made me read from my book. Just to her. Now, and that's inexperience for you, because now I would say, I'm not reading from the book, we're going to the pub. But so it's an honor for me to be here. It's also an honor, especially because, you know, the Australian Embassy has brought me out here, and something we do at home now, and I think I still feel like it's something we're still learning, is, you know, that we have welcomed a country where we respect, you know, the first people of our country, and I'm honoured today because I have authors, Indigenous authors from my home country here today, and so I want to say to Brenton and to Kim and to Janine, it's an honour. Belinda and Jen, thanks for being here, and Beck as well, thank you for having me, and so I feel like this is a sacred moment for me, and it's an honour to have you all here and to share in this moment. And so thank you very much. I'm thrilled. I think one of the reasons we do that is I think for us to understand the appreciation of stories. And I've always realised, not always realised. I think you finally start growing up as you do get older, and you realise that, and what I've realised is that stories are what we're made of, and you start becoming who you are long before you're even born. And so I'm going to tell you some of the stories that have led, I guess, to my writing career, or not, or that my writing career have come to in spite of these stories, but not really, I think. But I'm just going to tell you some of my favourite stories. And I'm in the middle now. I'm 44 years old, and I used to tell a lot of stories about my childhood growing up, and now I'm realising that I can start to tell stories about my kids. And so I'm going to tell you a story about my parents. I'm going to tell you 2 stories about my kids as well, and then I'll show you maybe how they've come about being not necessarily in my books, but a part of my books. And sometimes it's the stories under the stories that are as important. So I'm going to tell you my favourite story about my parents, and it's also the story of how I ruined Christmas in 1984. And it's all because of my alarm clock that I got for my 9th birthday, and it was white, it was in the shape of a dome, it had glow-in-the-dark hands and numbers, it had a little black ridged section at the back that you pushed up, and then when it went off, you just pushed it down. And it was not the way things are made today. Things are made today to be broken. This alarm clock was built to last, and it was heavy, and it was quite beautiful, and it was one of my prized possessions, being an early riser. And in Christmas 1984, something really terrible happened. And I loved Christmas mainly, not so much for the presents or the family time. I loved Christmas for the Christmas specials that were on TV. And it was 3 things. It was The Little Drummer Boy, it was Frosty the Snowman, and the Christmas classic, The Flintstones Christmas. And I would get up and watch these shows. And in 1984, they disappeared from screens across Australia or Sydney. And I thought, they're saving it for Christmas Eve. And so on the morning of Christmas Eve, I woke up and I set my alarm the night before. And you know when you're going away or you've got work to do in the morning or there's something big happening, often you'll wake up before your alarm goes off. I woke up before my alarm went off and I went into the lounge room. It's 1984, so you can imagine brown carpet, orange curtains, and the ugliest L-shaped couch in the history of the world, except that there was probably one next door as well. And so I went into the lounge room and I turned on the TV, and of course it's a big wooden box of a thing, and I turned it on, and of course, no Flintstones Christmas, no Little Drummer Boy, nothing good. And at one point then, I saw my dad wander down this hallway, and the hallway that went to my brother's and my room that we shared. And you could see diagonally into the room, and I saw my dad walk through that hallway, and it was that moment. I can tell you exactly what I was thinking, and apologies for the more conservatively spoken of you out there, but I'm 9 years old, I'm sitting on the couch, and I thought the only thing that I could possibly think, I just saw him go through and I went, oh shit, the alarm clock. I forgot to turn the alarm clock off. And then I watched in horror as my dad stood there studying the alarm clock. I look back now and I think, what sort of grown man doesn't know how to turn off a bloody alarm clock? All right, but he's looked at it, and then finally I again watched in horror as he just couldn't work it out, and he smashed the alarm clock to the floor and then casually walked back to bed. I'm sitting there on the couch going, oh my God, my dad just smashed my alarm clock. Also in hindsight, I look back on my brother, my useless older brother, and I think, just for once, couldn't you have got up and just done me one favour and switch off the alarm clock? But of course he didn't. He was sleeping through the whole thing. Next thing, my mum marched through the lounge room in a dressing gown. Now you're thinking Christmas cold. Reverse that. Christmas hot, all right, down in Sydney. And she's marched through in her pink dressing gown, which is more like a very long shirt with Hawaiian flowers on it. She's marched through, and then I heard the back fly screen door slam. What she was doing out the back is our garage was out the back there, and my dad had made this big thing about getting her these mugs for Christmas that she had wanted. She was out in the garage smashing the mugs in the plastic bag that they were in, and then she came marching back through the lounge room, didn't say a word to me. And my mum's the most gregarious, lovely, person you could ever meet, didn't even look at me. She's walked back through, and next to the little wooden sliding door, there were these 3 tables, and I think this is very 80s centric, is they were like the Russian dolls of side tables. There was a little one, there was a medium one, and there was a big one. On top of that was a board game. It wasn't Monopoly. It was a board game based on Monopoly, sort of called Careers. And she's picked it up on the way through, and I thought, what's she going to do with the Careers board game? But she walked through and around to the little bedroom where my mum and dad slept, and what she did was she proceeded to smash my dad over the head with the Careers board game. And I know some of you are out there thinking, this is his favourite story about his parents. But it kind of is. And that was when I had a really happy childhood, by the way. If the worst thing that happened to you is your dad smashed your alarm clock, you had a good childhood. And anyway, that was when I jumped up. And then I did go in there, but one of my sisters beat me to it. So I had two older sisters as well. And she had gone in there, and my mum had also thrown her jewellery box at my dad. And there was paper money from the Careers board game floating around in there. And I'm standing there going, oh my God, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something even more disturbing than any of that, because my brother and my older sister were standing in the hallway hugging each other. And I'd never seen that before in my entire life. I just thought, this is the greatest disaster of all time, and I've done it on the morning of Christmas Eve. And now, my two favourite details of the story are still to come. And my three favourite details. My mum went to work. Okay, my mum is 82 years old. She still sometimes goes to work cleaning people's houses, and just because she loves doing it and she loves being out, and I think she's trying to get away from my dad, all right? And they're still together, all right? And so she left, and next thing I'm sitting on my bedroom floor next to my dad, and this is one of the things I love about my dad, is he can do something like that. He can smash your alarm clock, and then you have to feel sorry for him. He's sitting there going, oh, I'm such a bastard. And I'm sitting there 9 years old going, oh, no, you're all right. It's okay, it's all right. He took me to the shops, to try to buy me a new, a replacement alarm clock. And of course, that didn't work out at all, because you could never find the same alarm clock, and probably nor should you. And there was this sort of more pathetic little alarm clock that we bought. And then there was this shop, and some of the few Australians in the audience here, there was this shop that sold sort of inappropriate stationery and cards, and and appropriate ones as well, called the Granny Mays shop. And in that shop, my dad, he's the only guy I know who could do something like that and then see fit to buy himself a present. He bought a little placard to put on his desk with this platitude on it, the lamest thing you could ever imagine, which said, "Keep your temper, no one else wants it." And he took that home and put it on his desk. But my favourite detail of all was later on, and I'm telling the story very quickly because I want to get through everything, was that when my mum came home from work that day, I was sitting on my sister's bed, I think, and she came in, and I looked at my mum and I said, I've been worried all day, and I said to her, so are you and Dad going to get divorced? Are you going to leave Dad? And she looked at me, and this was her moment, of course, to say, don't worry, these things these things happen, it'll blow over, don't worry at all. But she looked at me and she went, I don't know. I felt like saying, yep, and you have a great Christmas too, Mum. And so when I talk about that story, like the first thing I need to say, yes, my mum and dad are still together. And also, what I've realised over the years becoming a writer is that I think we do all invite chaos into our lives, and our stories are in the chaos. And growing up in a family with 4 kids, which is large in some ways, but not compared to other people, it was one of the richest. I was always surrounded by stories, and that's led now, to in my, I don't want to say so-called writing career, where my mum and dad, the other thing, like leading from, you have a moment like that, but my mum and dad would also tell me these great stories. And I was so lucky that I had not only these people who were so close to me and me close to them, that they had these amazing stories, but they had the ability to tell them in the most amazing, entertaining, beautiful, sad, comedic ways. And they were just telling me about their childhood. So I used to play cricket in the backyard, and I'd come in from the house with my brother and friends and things, and it was like sometimes a piece of Europe just came into our kitchen when just spontaneously my mum and dad would tell me their stories. And I'll just quickly tell you two really quick ones. The first was when my mum, she told us about how in the town where she grew up, often animals would be herded down the streets because it was a sort of farming district and between, just outside of Munich. And one day they heard all of that commotion coming down the street, and they all ran to the main street, and they realised that it wasn't animals coming down the street, and it was actually people. And it was Jewish people and other so-called criminals being taken to Dachau. And there was an old man who couldn't keep up, and it took a teenage boy to run into his house. So I always say, never underestimate teenagers. Teenage boy ran into his house, and this old man was so emaciated he could barely walk, and he had a long beard. And when the boy handed him the piece of bread, he fell to his knees, and he held the teenage boy by his ankles and cried into his feet, saying thank you. And then a soldier came by and ripped the bread away and whipped the old man for taking the bread, and then he chased the boy and he whipped him for giving him the piece of bread. And in that story, I immediately, even as a kid, I didn't think of it in terms of the actual wording, but I understood that was all of us. It was the beauty of us and the terror of us brought together. And so I was always interested in opposites when I started writing. And so in a book like The Book Thief, there's always, I think, the memory of my mum telling me how the ground was covered in ice when they'd come out of the bomb shelters in the morning, but the sky was on fire and the city was on fire. And I think I always remembered that. And when I started writing that book, which I thought, by the way, would be a 100-page novella, and got a bit out of hand, I also thought no one was ever going to read it. I thought of someone trying to recommend it to their friends, and the friend says, "What's it about?" And you say, well, it's set in Nazi Germany, it's narrated by death, nearly everyone dies. It's 580 pages long, you'll love it, But that's what freed me up to write it exactly how I felt like it needed to be written. And I think that, and I know, some of the authors in the audience too, I think we all understand at some point you cross the line between trying to please the audience and then saying, no, if you want to be a part of this, you've got to come with me. All right? And it's always the stories too that don't quite make it into the book. My dad grew up outside Vienna, and his town, my mum and dad were really young kids at this time, and my dad was terrified. They were all terrified of the Russian soldiers who occupied their town. And one day he was on the street, and he was in a gang of little kids, and they did all sorts of terrible things because they'd find stuff there was stuff everywhere. They found a flare gun once, and they tried to set it off, and instead of it going that way, it went that way, straight into the Russian camp, and then they ran. He said, I ran for 5 kilometres until I heard the gunfire stop. And so one day he was on the street, and there was a big Russian truck pulled up, and it was just him, the truck, and a soldier got out. And he walked towards my dad. And my dad was just, obviously, he was terrified of this big hulking man, and it probably maybe my size, but when you're a kid, everyone's big. And he said this man came up to him and his gun was hanging, from his other hand, and he stopped and he looked at my dad and he reached out with his hand. He just reached out, and with the back of his hand, he just touched him on the face like that. And he said, "Kind," meaning child. And my dad said, and this soldier had tears in his eyes when he did that. And then he turned around and he got back in his truck and he drove past. And so I remember my dad saying probably he had his own kids back home that he hadn't seen for many years, and you don't know what he's seen in that war. And so I grew up hearing stories like this, but not only that, there were also ridiculous childhood stories as well. They weren't telling me, they never sat me down and said, we're going to tell you about what happened in our town in the war. They were telling me about their childhoods, really. And so there were all these stories about characters in the town as well, and their friends and things like that. It was never premeditated. And I think that's what gave me a love of stories. And then all these years later, so things turn and turn and turn so many times, and then suddenly you're the parent and you've got your own kids, and suddenly your kids are the ones giving you the stories. And my two recent favourite stories do actually come from writing Bridge of Clay. And as some people know, it did take 13 years. And, and that's a fairly long time. Friends, I had a really good friend die in the writing of this book. And I had a lot of beautiful moments, but a lot of self-doubt. But it's funny then that there are stories that surround a book too. And they're as important to the book as the words in it. And so I'm just going to tell you quickly two of those stories. One was when I was finally doing the very last edits of this book, and I was sitting at the kitchen table. Kitchen's my favourite room in the house. I feel like the best stories happen in the kitchen. And I was just sitting at the table, 7 o'clock in the morning. My 12-year-old daughter was sitting diagonally opposite me, eating Special K. And I looked over. I don't know about all of you, but my children eat like barbarians. And I looked over and I said, can you keep it down over there? I'm trying to get some work done here. And she looked up, the spoon was halfway to her mouth, and she just stopped, looked at me and went, you? Work? And I thought about that all day. She's gone off to school, she's just, having fun. I'm sitting there going, oh, bloody hell, these bloody kids, who do they think they are? And then I thought, right, let's check this out. And I never count words in a book. I never do that. When someone says to me, oh, I'm 60,000 words, 1,000 words through this book, I have some idea what that means. But I hit the tools thing where it says word count, 128,000 or so words in Bridge of Clay. And then I thought, right, now let's divide that by how many days there are in 13 years. And probably won't surprise you, it came out as 1.9 words per day. And not even two. And so that was post book. But one of the things that really rescued this book, and I'm going to tell this really quickly because I want to make sure we have time for questions. I was going to read a little bit too, but that's gone out the window because I'm just going to tell you the story. That one of the things that revived this book was just realising how much I loved writing and how much I loved stories. And one of the things I was reminded of in that period was that about 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, I was just on holiday with my family, and my son was 4 years old. And I did something unusual. I took my T-shirt off. Oh, first thing, I was washing my car. That's really unusual. It was it was getting up to 100 degrees, so it was a good 38 degrees at home. And I was washing my car. And then I took my T-shirt off just to brush sand out of the back of my car. And my car, we've got 2 kids, 2 cats, 2 dogs. My car's full of sand, dog hair, and lolly wrappers. But I was brushing that out, and my son came around the corner. Now, my kids, there's always a story before the story or inside the story. My kids don't call me Dad, they call me Pop. And the reason they call me Pop is thanks to your country and the Berenstain Bears. There's those books. You know how the dad bear is always trying to teach the young bears something, but the dad's a real idiot? And they call him Pop? Well, when I read those books, because I found them from my childhood to my kids, they saw the dad was a real idiot, and they sort of went, oh, so they started calling me Pop. And it stuck. So my son came around the corner, he saw me with my T-shirt off, just sort of brushing sand out of the back of the car, and he stopped dead in his tracks, and he just looked at me. He's gone, "Hey, Pop, what are you doing here in just your nipples?" And I'm looking at him, and you know when you're in that moment, and I just thought two things. I thought, one, I just thought that's genius, you know. And I'm not that, like, I'm always talking my kids down, you know. I was like, no, my kids aren't gifted. My kids are just normal, nice, you know, pretty decent kids, you know. And but of course, the second thing I thought was, I might be able to use that. And in the piece I was going to read, that moment actually occurs in the book. And so you think, where did the last 13 years go? It went into moments like that. And so I think what I've realised is that, you know, under the stories, under the books, there are the words you never see. And I think the opportunities to come to days like this is where we get to show you those words and those stories, where you get to know us as people. So thank you very much. And the last thing I'll say is I became a writer when I was 16 years old, and I tried to write my first book because I realised when I was reading novels that I knew it wasn't true, but I believed it when I was inside it. And to be able to live in those two worlds and to live a life that's full of stories, you know, it's a privilege, and it's what makes days like this a privilege as well. So thank you very much. And if people have questions, please run to the microphone, and I'll try to answer quickly. Thank you. All right, jump straight in. Come straight in, and I'll try to be quick.
Hi. In the 13 years it took you to write the book, how did you push through moments of doubt where you were kind of trying to plot things and such?
How did I get through the moments of doubt? I mean, honestly, with great difficulty. And I think I'm always weirdly optimistic. You know, I'd say, oh, that was a bad day, that was a bad week, that was a bad year. But I think what you have to, seriously, you know, and I think what actually, there's a belief you have when you're a writer. I always think it's going to come together at some point. And, you know, and I've, you know, recently, because there's a big cricket series on at the moment, and they're talking about batting, you know, through the bad periods, because it's going to come together, but you've got to be willing to stick through the bad ones. And that's why I say to people who want to be writers is, you know, I don't have a big intellect or anything like that, but I do stay with it. I just stay there. But at the same time, don't be too hard on yourself in those moments. Sometimes you can't write, and sometimes you're just, that's when you're developing your own style, I think, and what you're trying to do. And there'll come a point where you've stored it all up to a point where you go, now I can't walk away from it, and now I have to face it, and you go, now, and then you do it. You're cultivating the iron will all the time. So that's what gets you through the doubt, I think. Yes, on that side?
So I wrote my senior thesis on the book Thief, so my question might sound a bit weird. But did you, in writing the book Thief, have to be conscious of the fact that you were writing from like a first-person perspective from a traumatic event that you were like a generation kind of removed from?
I think I was very free to write that book, and I was really naive. I was in my mid-20s, you know, when I first thought of the idea, and then I thought of bringing death in as the narrator, and it's sort of, I think once I did that, all bets were off a little bit. I sort of went, okay, it's not going to be a 100-page book anymore, it's going to be a 250-page book. And I think just not really understanding quite what I was doing allowed me to be quite free, and so, yeah, I didn't worry as much back then. I didn't worry before I started so much, and so I think that's why I feel lucky that I understood that I wanted to be a writer when I was quite young. You know, because if I was starting to write the book Thief now, I'd probably be quite pent up about all that involved. You know, sometimes it helps to be a bit numb to what you're doing, and to think, like I said, that nobody was going to read it anyway. And so you can imagine how free I felt writing that book. And when there was a risk to be taken, I took it. And my biggest criticism of that book now, looking back, is that it goes too far often just in the language, and there are times on every page of a bit of a lack of discipline, but maybe it was better to go too far than not far enough, and it's what gives the book its kind of exuberance. I think after a while you get to look back and sort of look back nostalgically at what you were like back then and what the book was like. I hope that answers it in some way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, again.
Thank you for being here today and sharing part of your life with us. The Bridge of Clay, did you ever intend for Clay to be presented as autistic?
No, I didn't actually. I wanted Clay to make he doesn't necessarily make a conscious decision to not talk, for example. It's more, Clay, I just wanted him to be a mysterious figure. And you don't actually know Clay until the second last chapter of the 99th chapter of 100 chapters in the book. And it's a book that reveals itself quite slowly and reveals its main character slowly. And I don't apologise for that. So for me, I never think about those things. Like I never think about, say, autism or, in the case of, World War II or something like that. I'm always writing from the inside out in that kind of way. And I think, trying to understand Clay as I'm writing, no matter how meticulously I've planned. So I didn't intend that at all, or not intend, but I never considered that he would be. Okay, no worries. Yes?
Hi, what was your process of developing death into a character that people who typically would fear it can empathize with, and just making it seem like such a human character?
Yeah, it was funny with death that people come up to me, or not all the time, but every now and again, people come up to me and say, "You've made me feel so much better about dying." And I say, "I'm really happy for you," because I don't feel much better at all. But the first version, I'll be very quick, the first version of The Book Thief, Death was really macabre and was really enjoying his work. And I wrote 200 pages like that, and I went, that's not it. You spend so much of your writing life going, that's not it. That's not it, and that's not it either. And somehow you end up back there with just a minor adjustment, a minor unexpected thing. And it was when I thought of the last line of the book where I thought, okay, that's it. Death is actually a little bit afraid of us and afraid for us. And he's writing this book to prove to himself that humans can be beautiful and selfless and worthwhile. And then when I just readjusted, that's what brought the book truly to life. And so it wasn't much of it's a process of finding the right little piece of luck. But you've got to be there for it, I guess. Thank you. Yes.
Hello.
Wrap it up.
Okay, yeah.
I just got the wrap it up sign. Any other questions? I'm here, so feel free to ask me.
I wanted to talk about more of like the hurdles of seamlessly integrating different point of views, because I feel like from a craft angle, like having a narrator as death, but then also having first person, just what were some of the hurdles that you had to overcome in writing that?
I think the hurdles I feel like I have general hurdles. The first is I'm looking for what feels right and for what not makes me want to read more, but I'm looking for that one thing. Okay, this is the best way to describe it. I know I was supposed to wrap it up. When I was a kid, I lost an athletics race that I thought I won, and I went and complained to my dad. You can imagine how sympathetic he was. He said, "I thought you won too, but you made a big mistake. You didn't win by enough. You have to win by so much that they can't take it off you." And when I think about writing, I don't think about winning or being better than anyone, because that's a pointless exercise. But what I'm trying to do is write so much like myself that I know that only I could have written it. And that's what I know about, in particular, The Book Thief and Bridge of Clay. I know that no matter what anyone else thinks of those books, I know that only I could have written it. And that's the voice I'm trying to find. And that's, in a way, the voice that's inside that voice you're talking about. I'm trying to find that feeling in me when I'm reading and rereading. And I hope that made even some semblance of sense.
Thank you.
I know there are still people with questions, and I know we're supposed to wrap it up. It's awful of me, but how often does this happen? I'm going to take one more from that side. They can kick me out of here. What are they going to do? Yes, quickly.
So
I was wondering also when there are situations where you feel a lot of self-doubt, if it's similar to feeling unmotivated to write, because I feel like during times of self-doubt you feel like you can't write, but motivation, it's like you want to, but something's stopping you.
Yeah, that's a lot of the time. I think what you get better at learning is to realise when you should take it easy on yourself. And so I'll often, like sometimes I'll go for a surf, and I feel a bit guilty. Sometimes I watch the same movies over and over and over again, movies that I loved, and I just take notes then. So I'm working whilst not working, and so, and that's why I'm saying in those times, that's when you're thinking and you're dreaming, and that's why if I take my dogs for a walk, I never listen to music because I want to be a dog on those walks. That's my dream, that's the time where I get to dream, and so. It's finding the spaces outside your writing that fit into it, and then you arrive at writing a little bit fresher again. So, I hope that makes sense as well. And, I don't want to get kicked out. So I will just say thanks for being so generous, and you could be anywhere today, but you're here. Thank you.